Hi, so I'm Noelle Hikes with Azultera. We are passionate about regenerative agriculture and about rotational grazing. We are very excited about carbon sequestration in our lands and mapping and proving and verifying what kind of carbon sequestration we are doing, as well as what the fluxes of greenhouse gases are in an environment like the wonderful one you're looking at here. And our very first maiden voyage is here with a drone that we've loaded with a little bit overloaded with a sensor payload. It's one of our first prototype sensor payloads where we have a laser system, and we're going to be mapping only one greenhouse gas today, and that is methane, which is of interest to a lot of people because of its potency as a greenhouse gas. So it's one of our first forays. We're going to be doing a lot of greenhouse gas mapping, not just methane, carbon dioxide as well. So this is what we're going to do, and here we go. We're excited. All right, let's see if we got any data. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
So we just did our maiden flight over here over a herd of cows, and it was a success. We were super excited about the data that we've collected today. We not only took data over a herd of cows, but we also took data over bare ground as well as very grassy land that you can see here. So we're going to compile all that data, we're going to synthesize it, we're going to take a lot more data coming up in the next several months so that we can synthesize and correlate all of it. So stay tuned to what Azultera is going to do for greenhouse gas and carbon dioxide and methane mapping. So I want to first launch into what Azultera is and who we are. We are planning to be the guide to regenerative agriculture. That is a lot of moving parts associated with it. So I know this audience currently understands a lot about what regenerative agriculture is, but I'll give a very basic overview, which you guys could probably tell in your sleep. So just wanted to go through a little bit. So we want to be the guide to regenerative agriculture. And I'll go through a little bit of the story of why we formed this company as a electrical engineer, married to a cattle rancher, though. I didn't have a lot of understanding about agriculture to begin with. But I can go into basically the genesis of Azultera was for climate change and for what we're doing to our atmosphere and our soils. So one of the important things that we wanted to do was guide to get regenerative agriculture so that the planet thrives. But very first and foremost, in order to get regenerative agriculture to really sink in worldwide, especially on a global scale, we need profit for ranchers and farmers. And there's a lot of other reasons why we want to do that as well, which we'll go into. So our goal is to have farmers and ranchers profit, their communities flourish, which isn't typical in a lot of rural communities, and then have the planet thrive as well. So in explaining what regenerative agriculture is, we start with what it isn't. And that's sort of our problem statement, right? We've got non-sustainable agriculture as kind of the status quo, which kills the biodiversity of the land. It depletes it, and it inspires this chemical dependency where there's constant inputs having to be put into the soil, having to be put into crops. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse as we deplete the topsoil and deplete the land in general. It also creates a centralized, industrialized, and very vulnerable, as we saw last year during COVID and during hackers infiltrating our meat packers. Our supply of food is extremely centralized, and therefore it is extremely vulnerable. And that came home to roost last year. So in the end, this also strips and saps the water supply, the land, and belches megatons of greenhouse gases into the air by way of the destruction that we're doing to the land. And it's creating what the UN has just called this year a code red. Our climate is at code red for all humanity. We need to do something about that. And for me, I thought, well, gee, why don't we just change this? Why don't we just all change over to regenerative agriculture? Not so simple, but that's a big, bold goal. And what we want to do, of course, as we all know here, is we want to leverage biodiversity. We want to leverage biology, cut out the chemical dependency, and leverage what we know about biology and what we know about prescribing the right models for that biology to thrive. Let's inspire sort of I call this kind of like the craft beer movement. You know, you looked at the industrialized, centralized beer movement. Let's do that for agriculture too, where we're inspiring people who are maybe bioengineers, who are maybe in a small independent area, inspiring them to create innovative concepts and latch on to this regenerative agriculture mindset to create sort of a craft farm or craft ranch approach. So by way of doing that, we're going to, we believe, with regenerative agriculture, regenerate the entire Earth system. We know as regenerative agriculture proponents that soils hold 3 times more carbon than air, maybe more so as well, as we go along learning about this. And we can sequester a lot of that carbon out of the air that we have been throwing up into it for the past 100 or more years. So we have right now, we have a broken regenerative cycle. So there are these folks that are out there that are trying to get into this regenerative mindset. And what we want to do is empower them to do that. Right now, first of all, there's this drug of chemical dependency. Not a lot of people understand how to leverage biology in order to make things right for agriculture. So what happens is profit stays in the hands of the centralized agriculture system. We want to change that. There's also money available through impact investing and through carbon credits. So you have government agencies, you have just impact investors, people who want to put millions, even billions possibly of dollars into something like this, but it's hard to connect the dots between those independent farmers and ranchers and those people who want to put that money there. So there's not really a lot of connection through that impact, the government and industry carbon credit funding. We want to change that. So for example, here's what's happening to agriculture. This is an example of the centralization that's happening. We lost 100,000 farms over 7 years between the period of 2011 to 2018. We want to reverse that trend. We definitely do. And thus, what we want to do is empower this regenerative cycle. So you start these folks, independent farming, able to define that their processes and what they're doing with the land is actually impacting the environment. It's actually impacting the land. You need all of that verification and data in order to claim the credit for what you are doing to the land. And thus, you just inspire this regenerative cycle also, not just for the land, not just for the earth, but also for these farmers and ranchers. You see somebody down the street who's got 3,000 acres of ranch land, who's suddenly white oak pastures, for instance, who's suddenly really sort of kicking this regenerative ranch into high gear, and they're extremely profitable, and they're able to fund their entire community, basically, on their ranch, which is really exciting. Then I think a lot of other folks were able to look at that as a prescription, things that are being done here at Living Web Ranch and Living Web Farms. Those sorts of things are blueprints for success for any other independent farmer or rancher who wants to adopt these processes. So that's what we're trying to do. So this is from the Rodell Institute, which I think everybody knows, this report that talked about, hey, we can, through these regenerative agriculture processes, we can sequester more than 100% of current CO2 emissions. We could sequester all of that carbon dioxide. We could do that and reverse the greenhouse effect. And that was a big, bold, huge statement. And then we've not really proven that yet. But we know we see it. We see it on these lands that have been converted from glyphosate destroyed areas to suddenly these beautiful pasture lands. We see it with pictures. We see it with that. And we're starting to gather the data. Let's verify that. And let's prove it to the world. That's what we want to do. We want to apply biological products. And this is what Azultera would like to do, is basically take some of those prescriptions, take some of those biology tools, and then apply them to other models. You take this blueprint here of biochar applied, or amendments or inoculants that have worked, or crops that are prescribed for a particular area. Go ahead and apply that as a model. Let's do that as a prescription for success for these other independent farmers. And then at the same time, we need to take some technology tools. And that's where, little Miss Engineer comes in and gets excited about regenerative agriculture. Hey, wait a minute. What they need is data. I believe it. I see it. I see what's happening with regenerative agriculture. I see what's happening with rotational grazing and the non-selective grazing as well. I see the beauty of that. And I think I know, as me, that I could probably create a lot of technology tools along with my cohorts, Al here and Dave. Oh, we didn't dial Dave in. Well, we'll dial him in maybe later. But to bring the technology to bear that can actually create sort of a carbon landscape. So understanding where, if you're looking over a vast range of land, where the sinks and emissions are actually coming from. And that's important for both the very good regenerative agriculture practices as well as the not so good practices, or things we don't even know about, like what kinds of lands are emitting methane for whatever reason that we don't even know. Those are some of the things we'd like to do. But what we need to know is, how do we do that? How do we measure and verify that? Well, we think at Azultera we have some ideas about that. We also looked, as a group, we looked at the carbon credit markets. You want your farmers and ranchers to be able to reap the benefits of carbon credit. Right now, the standards for measuring that are so flawed that 11 out of 12 carbon offset credits that were determined, this was last year, lacked absolutely any impact on the climate. So they basically were sort of theory numbers, not really taking a lot of data, just theorizing that this would, that, planting so many trees would work. And that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. What we need is data. So I'm going to reiterate this point probably 1,000 times. So the problem is you've got these hidden carbon offenders, these things that we don't really know about. Some of the things people like to guess about. For instance, none of us like the vilification of cattle being, they're a carbon offender, when there are tons more hidden carbon offenders that we're not really focusing on, that we should be. We should be looking at it all on a grand scope. And we should be able to compare them as well. So we have sort of a carbon dioxide and a methane crisis. We have too much carbon in our atmosphere. We know this. We know that 13 million tons of methane is being given off currently by leaking natural gas wells. It just is. And that's been happening for quite a few years without anybody really addressing it. So let's go find that. We've also got these hidden carbon removers. We all know that the roots of these perennial grasses go down feet below the surface. And we know that they're removing carbon dioxide to a great extent. What is the extent how many tons of carbon per acre per year are we removing? Those hidden carbon removers need to see the light of day. And we need to figure out which are the best ones, which broadleaf grasses, what kind of crops are the best ones to put in there for our carbon sequestration. And then let's make good use of this $215 billion of carbon offsets. Instead of people saying, oh, they're just greenwashing, let's actually make them remove carbon and define it. That's what we want to do. So what we want to do is we want to measure, map, and verify. And this is something that I got really excited about because I'm on the board of a drone company, which I'll talk a little bit about. And I also love to invent and create laser systems, optoelectronic systems for sensor payloads. It's something that I've done for 25 years now. So I'm excited about putting lots of different sensor payloads either on drones or on farm in order to detect all of this and create very wide-ranging maps of our greenhouse gas emissions and sinks. Then what got me really excited was the $100 million prize for carbon removal. I saw this early this year, and this is before we formed Azultera, and I basically tried to just get people to get excited about this. And at the same time, I was reading all the regenerative agriculture books. I was reading Dirt to Soil. I was looking through all of the Alan Savory videos and all of his content. And then, of course, I found Living Web Farms, and I started looking through all of those videos and getting super excited because that just seemed to have every possible menu you could choose of regenerative agriculture practices and what we could do. And I was so excited about it, I started reaching out to a lot of different folks. And at the same time, in parallel, I got Al Alkadi and David Ponovac, who are amazing artificial intelligence and machine learning folks who I've worked with in the past. And I said, hey, we've got to get together and we've got to do something about this. We've got to team up with some regenerative agriculture experts, and let's go after this prize, not with a technology solution, vacuuming up carbon dioxide. Let's use natural biomachines, which are grasses and cows, to solve the carbon removal process. I think we can do it. I think gigatons can be removed if we do things the right way. So I contacted Living Web Farms, and suddenly here I am. But we're actually really excited about this. We're excited about going for this prize. It's a very daunting task. And I'll just talk a little bit about it, and then I'll talk about it a little bit more later on because I'd like to engage the audience and what we'd like to do specifically with Living Web Farms. But it is the largest XPRIZE. XPRIZE is something done by some pretty wealthy folks who are technologists to solve grand challenges, scientific grand challenges. And this one is pretty exciting. This one's completely funded by Elon Musk. It's a $100 million competition for gigaton carbon dioxide removal. It's a 4-year program. It has a milestone prize this year of about, in this upcoming year, of about $1 million just as a milestone. But we'd like to go for the grand prize, which is a $50 million prize. That's the first place prize. So second runner-up wouldn't be bad. That's $30 million. But we're going to go for it with regenerative agriculture. So I'll talk a little bit more. So what you're seeing here is our very, very first, as fast as we could put it together so we could take some data here, we're creating this Sea-Seeker Carbonscaper is what we're calling it. It's a greenhouse gas flux mapper in 3 dimensions. It's a UAV based. It could be any airborne based, but we like to fly low, particularly because of the laser that we're using right now. So we're using UAVs. And we like it to be small and lightweight. It leverages machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we take, I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So we take data, and we take data from different sources. And we may be taking a lot more data than we're taking right now, not just laser data, but also other imagery that we're going to tie in together. And the synthesis of that with machine learning and artificial intelligence is extremely powerful. We build through that these comprehensive localized carbon maps over agricultural operations. And I'll talk about why that's different from what's been done before. And that measures and maps and verifies for all stakeholders, including all the carbon credit folks who really want to make something useful out of their carbon credits, and the agencies, the government agencies and others, and of course, the ranchers and farmers. They want to know what prescriptions are not only going to provide for them a carbon credit, but also something that's going to provide good things for the plants that are growing or the pasture lands that are growing on their fields. And they want to produce great yields for whatever they're producing, be that cattle, be that or any other livestock or some sort of crop or orchards. So the state of the art that's out there currently for mapping, well, actually not, I won't say mapping, for measuring greenhouse gas fluxes are usually point sources. So everybody knows about, you take your soil samples, you go out and core a soil sample, and that's at a point. You go to another area and you take another point. And these are sometimes tedious operations, and you have a point source. It's good information, it's very quantifiable, and you learn a lot from it. It's, in some cases, it doesn't have, it maybe has more of a longer time component to it, so you don't see very quick, fast, day-to-day changes. You do see some of those things with a eddy covariance tower, and that's where you have an anemometer, you have a lot of microclimate data, and what this is basically looking at is the cycle of carbon dioxide as it is emitting and sinking into the land. Think about it as measuring at a point source, what is the respiration of the land in that particular area. We also have these closed chamber assessments that we can make for certain vegetation. So we're able to measure for a particular plant or an area of grass, let's say, what that carbon uptake is of that vegetation and soil in that area. So that's great, and you can get point data there too. The only problem with that is okay, imagine you want to map 1,000 acres now. So that's where you sort of, well, you've got this amount of information. So do I just theorize that the rest of it is just like it? Not necessarily. You may be doing something different. You may be rotating cattle on various pastures. You may have more water in one pasture than you do in another, or in a different crop area as another. There's a lot of dynamics that have to do with what is actually happening, topographic, sort of as a topographic flow. So we do have some of that spatial data that's actually readily available to us. We have tons of satellite imagery, a lot of it that comes in so you can look at specific areas of the Earth. You can look at you can look at what it's like over Florida for any given time. But it is quite low resolution. It isn't to the granularity where you're going to want to look at pasture A versus pasture B and you try a different treatment. That isn't really going to give you that kind of granularity. You also have direct ground measurement chemical sensors where you can look and you can actually see what, in some cases, CO2 is actually doing in that environment. It's pretty tricky to do, and you have to actually be up and very close and personal, but you don't get any real quantification. Really, with either of those, you don't have granularity on concentration levels, and so that's a little bit difficult. So some of the technologies that we are utilizing is, and these are things that can provide both the mapping as well as long as you know what you're doing with data science, you can provide the all of the data on the quantity, the concentrations of greenhouse gases and what kinds of gases you have there, as well as you can watch flux. So you can do that with laser spectroscopy. What we are going to be doing is mapping, using laser spectroscopy, which I actually have the little laser that we had mounted here, and I'll do a little demo on it in a little bit. And I've got some gas here of propane, which it sees like methane, so I'll show you that. And then we also are going to be utilizing some specialty. I have not a fancy one yet, but I'm going to get one that's a little fancier. So you have various IR cameras that you can use to pick up various things that the vegetation is doing. So you can actually look at how the plant is processing from basically conducting its photosynthesis. So we're looking at it with various camera wavelengths, you can do that. So combining this with laser spectroscopy, along with likely weather data that we would take at the same time, we're going to tie it all together with machine learning and really produce some amazing mapping. Although we have done some that, even with our little, our very, very new maiden prototype, we've produced some pretty cool things. And we actually got some data from today's run that we'll show too. So let me see here. Let's go. Okay. So machine learning, we have a whole entire presentation on machine learning that Dave Ponovac gives that is excellent, but we're gonna save that maybe for a later date because there's a lot to that. It's not just, okay, give me some data and I'll make amazing things out of it. There's a lot of information behind that. And maybe Al, you can speak to that. What I'm basically saying here in these bullets is that you take all this data and ground truth, possibly from soil data, from actual plant data that we would take through closed chambers, and then you do in parallel the UAV testing and mapping, and then you correlate it with machine learning algorithms. And then from that, what we're wanting to do is get optical flow of spectroscopy data. But we're going to be doing the greenhouse gas flux mapping, but also water content. I believe we can do that too, John. So Al, maybe you can give just a few seconds, how you synthesize that kind of data.
So for the machine learning, what we do is we build up these models. We take all this data and we aggregate it, and essentially we can predict, given certain patterns, we can predict what would this look like in the future. So this way, the more patterns you learn, when you apply it to another area, you're able to predict what's going to happen here. So that is, in a very, nutshell, it's a predictive tool for statistical analysis.
What do you think, John, about the lack of data in this sphere? That's actually
I think it's the hardest part. You got all these companies and a lot of greenwashing going on. Oh, we're doing all these great things, but they don't have the proof. And I love that you've got water content in there because that becomes a big cost in irrigated agriculture. And my first thought was like these soil things, how can we put them in the field and the cows won't touch them? Can we put them slightly below the surface and you could still read them?
I think so.
Because then they wouldn't be interesting. If they're just sticking up, they're super curious. So they probably want to poke around. But no, I think it's great. And once you get to affecting local hydrologic cycles, then those in turn affect the big ones, and now you're stabilizing the climate on a big scale. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Awesome. That's exciting.
Another thing I'd like to add for machine learning is it gives you the advantage of data augmentation. So you have the ability to combine data from different sources and sort of predict what patterns happen when you combine things that you wouldn't usually combine. You would see correlations and would help us map out, for example, carbon footprints or methane footprints.
Yeah, I expect that out of maybe a few wavelengths if we had multiple different wavelengths that we were able to.
We were talking about the double wavelengths and how we're able to correlate the data, which is you don't really get in a one-dimensional run. But when you do that, you build your model based on that, and then you're able to do better predictions.
Awesome. Thanks. Cool. So we'll give you an example. So we started in just last week with our maiden voyage, which we used our first methane mapping tool that you see here, where we took our maiden prototype on a voyage with our small UAV, our sensor payload. We used laser spectroscopy. You can see it flying over here. This was a local landfill in Florida. We use a data logger and a GPS along with the flight, basically to tell us as we're moving along relatively where we are. So you can see on this landfill that we've got some taps that they basically are tapping off from the landfill to feed a natural gas facility. Isn't that correct, Colin? So yep. So basically that's what we were flying over, and we developed this prototype in an ultra short time frame, weeks long. So here is the results from that. And as you can see, these were 2 runs. So what you're seeing is hotspots there, not necessarily insane amounts of methane, although compared to what we were able to measure today over cattle, it's about 30 times the amount of methane that we're looking at today. So what's great about this is in the very first prototype run, again, this is our baby steps. We are crawling before we walk, before we run. But we're integrating still positional and actual concentration data. And I'll show you how this takes concentration data, thousands of data points captured in minutes, versus something that's, say, on a point source, you're measuring a core of soil carbon, right? You're measuring thousands, and you can go fly for 10 minutes and capture those thousands of points. It's quantifiable, it's also repeatable, and it's identifiable. So you're able to identify where you just mapped that. It's pretty powerful. So we're going to grow that from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional to 4-dimensional data and when I say 4-dimensional, I'm not being with Star Trek on this, but I'm talking about time. So what we want to do is we want to understand where the gas is going. Is it going out of the land, or is it going into the land? So that's something that's very critically important for us when we do carbon dioxide monitoring, and methane as well, because we definitely do have we do have methane sinks as well as methane emitters in certain land areas. So next steps. We've got 3 times the drone coming, maybe even 4 or 5 times this monster here. So we started out with this little guy here on the left, and as you can see, that same sensor suite on our big monster that we're going to be flying. That's the Matrice 210, and we're labeling that guy the Beast. So we're excited about that. That's going to be our next drone, and we're going to be loading it up with quite a few sensors, very different than what we did here. So pretty excited about that, but that's going to take us some time. We wanted to get some initial data, and the reason being that we're going to be meeting with a big oil company toward the end of September, and we want to have methane mapping results, so we can demonstrate how we can look for the bad in the oil and gas industry. So we're teamed up with, we love partnerships, so that's why we're here with Living Web. We love to partner with people who are experts in their field. We are obviously not drone experts. Please don't look at my drone, what I did to it. But we've teamed up with a company called Census Tech, which is actually here in Daytona. We're actually a Cocoa Beach company, so we're very close to them. And these guys do long-range, heavy payload drones. They usually do inspection of power lines. They do some incredible work. Very excited to be working with them and another company for the oil and gas industry, looking for leaking wells and looking for leaks in natural gas facilities. So we're excited about that. And then, of course, this is where we get really into the meat of what we also want to collaborate with Living Web Farms. We want to do a collaboration for many reasons. There's lots of things we want to collaborate on, but I wanted to talk a little bit about and kind of get into the details of how we'd like to collaborate with Living Web Farms. So we've got this $100 million prize for carbon removal. I will repeat myself a little bit. So that $100 million prize purse is basically looking at rebalancing the Earth's carbon cycle. And some of the requirements for this prize are that what they are wanting the participants to do is to demonstrate gigaton of net CO2 removal per year. So starting out with 1,000 tons for the milestone prize this year, then going up to demonstrating, maybe not demonstrating gigatons actually removed, but by 2050 being able to show a demonstrated roadmap or path for gigaton CO2 removal. I believe, and I believe our team believes, that gigaton carbon dioxide removal is definitely accomplishable by our regenerative agriculture practices. What we want to do is verify that and work together, hopefully with Living Web Farms, to use the data over the past years combined with current mapping that we're able to do. So parsing together several years and then determining what level per acre per year either we started with and maybe we ramped up to an accelerated rate, or whatever it is. I don't know if we know the extended period of time, but we'll definitely be able to take data over a period of months. We'll be able to take as much data as we want. Really just depends on how many drones and how much time we have, and also soil samples too, I think we'll need to do. But I think we're going to be able to demonstrate a path to gigaton carbon dioxide removal as well. So this is something we want to discuss. This is definitely something for us to talk about. So there's that project, but there's also these models and prescriptions for large ag operations. And then maybe, Colin, you want to talk about, so we want to talk about, look, we want to go from smaller operations to let's encourage the big guys to do regenerative agriculture. So Colin, so maybe you want to talk about the Desiree Ranch.
So just west of us, covering Brevard, Osceola, and Orange counties, we have Desiree Cattle and Citrus, which is the single largest landowning agriculture entity in the state of Florida. They average 42 to 45,000 head of cattle cycled per year, and they right now have 10,000 acres of central pivot irrigation cropland, which they're going to be moving up to 50,000 acres of central pivot irrigation cropland over the next 10 years. One of the large problems that they have is low quality forage for their cattle, and they are shipping their cattle out into the Midwest to be finished. And so one of the big solutions we see for being able to provide them is providing improved forage through biochar inoculants, and providing them with prescription improvements for their croplands or their grasslands to be able to finish their cattle home here in Central Florida. So creating a full circle, because we also have some other problems with carbon dioxide emissions from our power plants. We have nitrate and ammonia problems in our lagoons, the Indian River Lagoon. So we can create specific products using waste from these ranches, especially this large single entity, and then be able to bring those enhanced products right back and put them back into the soil within their citrus farms and the cattle grasslands that they're using day to day. And so we can take that and create a full circle local community, and also incorporate, as well as this one large ranch, the 12 smaller ranches that are surrounding it that have more specialized applications. But we can take all of this and create a local biodiverse community, which is not only creating a huge impact on our carbon and methane sequestration initiatives, but also is improving the profits for all these ranches collectively. So create a template which is then replicatable, which we can move on and use in other agriculture communities as well.
Awesome. I'm excited about that. I think it'll be great. That's awesome. So that's sort of where what we want to do is we want to collaborate with Living Web Farms, and we want to use Living Web as a blueprint that we can carry and carbon copy in other places. Carbon sync copy. So to kind of summarize that, we want to show that regenerative ag practices can sequester 100% more carbon than non-sustainable ag. And we want to also quantify the tons of carbon per acre per year. So specifically, this is where I'm kind of getting into specifics. We want to know what data is out there that we can benchmark off of for soil carbon and water retention long-term data analysis. We also want to do some ground truth. So do some of these closed chamber setups. We want to take more soil data too, than at the same place where you've done it before, hopefully. And then determine, if we're able to, the carbon sequestered per year per acre. We also want to do biochar. We want to understand the biochar applications and or other remediation methods and what the improvement on carbon sink calculations are. And then team on those prescriptions and models like we're talking about, say, for the Desiree Ranch or other ranches, or maybe even some other ranches out west that I know of. Maybe we could use them as well out there too. Let's see, what else do I have? So in conclusion, let's be the guide to regenerative agriculture. Let's prescribe these regenerative systems. Let's verify their success, and let's deliver credit and profit where it is due for the farmers and ranchers who are practicing regenerative agriculture. I think that's it. Yes. All right. Okay, now can I do show and tell? Can I do you have to film me? I get nervous. So, no, I think so. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to set up, if you can just take a moment and let me just set up real quick here. So this is just an example of it. This is just a FLIR camera. So yeah, don't hold the bottom part of it here, because you're actually, there you go. So you can just kind of see, it's an example of different wavelength, a different wavelength camera. So a regular camera that's showing you, visible light spectrum. This is showing you an infrared spectrum. Yeah. So whatever is emanating off of my body, it's actually looking at that. So it's a thermal camera. This is just an example of different wavelengths. So it's a camera that sees in different wavelengths, right? So an IR camera. What's great is we can determine how the plants are actually breathing in the grassland and everything by how it actually is emitting certain wavelengths of light. So we can actually load this drone up with all kinds of looking at cameras, with different wavelengths. We're going to say, oh, okay, in UV, it's giving off this much. In the infrared, it's giving off this much. And certain plants give off certain, they basically either emit or absorb different light depending on what their health is. Yeah. So it's really interesting. So we can learn a lot.
John Ott, man, you got to read his book.
Really? Wow. Oh, I totally do.
He's the one that figured out.
I had all those lights for years. Yeah. I was at the Ott Light Center. I had all those.
So that's just this is an infrared camera, just to kind of give you an example of what I was talking about different wavelengths plants emit or absorb depending on their health, depending on the type of plant it is, depending on how much it's respiring and how much it's breathing too. Yeah. So we can leverage all that kinds of information.
And all those.
You said we need grass and cows, and I just heard everybody that's on that side saying, blasphemy, blasphemy. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking like, well, look at everybody's eating from these cow feedlots, right? Yeah. But if you took all those feedlots and turned them into this, and there was no more of those, but that amount was here on the ground, on the earth, that would solve everything. That would do the 50 gigatons in a heartbeat.
And so what I'd love to do is take that data to prove it. Right, exactly. That is what is so important. But there's a lot, like I was saying, I'm very cow friendly. I think cows are awesome. First of all, they're extremely nutritionally dense, so it's good food. And in addition, cows are carbon, and so is the grass, and exactly. And so let's sequester the carbon where it belongs, and let's encourage grass to keep growing and growing by munching down on it and making the soil very healthy and inspiring biodiversity. Let's do this. But everyone keeps and John sent us this article the other day that was just like it's like this times 20. They talk about methane, and the very first photograph they show is a cow. When I'm sitting here measuring just a landfill, not even a natural gas facility, a capped.
They're anti-life, but that's okay.
Right.
That stuff's okay.
Exactly.
They're
So
looking to point, it's the cows.
right.
Yeah, don't look at my landfill and the space shuttle and all of these things.
Recycle at home, not get rid of plastic.
But the mindset, the mind shift is occurring, but it will occur at a greater pace the more data we feed it. The more data we feed.
When they see the proof,
Exactly.
that's the only tipping point you can get to.
I'll do one more thing where I wanted to just show you guys real quick. I'm going to get this guy set up. I just wanted to show you. This was actually, and I'm going to point it over here. But this is, what I have here is propane in a bag. So this was actually how we did, because I was really frustrated with this. I was frustrated with my hedge trimmer so I'm just going to point it over here at the wall. What this does is basically it sends out 2 wavelengths of light that are slightly offset. And basically what it does is it leverages those 2 separate wavelengths, one of which is highly absorptive by methane or propane, and the other is not. So basically it compares the 2, and it says, okay, if it's absorbing on this wavelength but not at this one, then I definitely have methane. If it's absorbing on both of them, then Noelle's hand is in front of it, and so I shouldn't call that methane. So it's really interesting how it does it, but it basically can measure through and it's through spectroscopy, is what every chemist uses in systems. It uses those wavelengths of light to determine concentrations of a gas in a given atmosphere. Okay, so I'm measuring right here. So this is actually what we were measuring on the out at the ranch. So if you can see, obviously, it's not measuring any methane because there's no methane in the way. But as soon as I put some propane in the way, see, there you go. So this is actually what it's looking at. So, and actually, if I tilt it a little bit to the side, it'll see more methane. If I hold it right, because it's looking at a larger volume in a column. All it sees is that you see that very narrow laser there. All it sees is a column of gas that's within that narrow beam that it sends down. And it's measured in parts per million meter. So it means how many meters you have in this column. And it actually measures that as well. So say we're about, 15 feet or so from there. So it's gonna, well, of course that's not in meters. So let's go 5 meters. So say this is 5 meters. So it's so many parts per million within that 5 meters. So let's see here. So you can see. So that's actually what we're measuring. So if there's none there, then you got nothing. So, and then if I put some other, it has weird responses. If you have, let's just see, I'll put Noelle in there. Let's see if there's Noelle. Noelle doesn't really give off anything. So a cow really won't, but it'll mess up a little bit with the reflection. So you'll get generally on a grassy area, you'll get generally anywhere from 5 to 20-ish. But when it gets up to around 100 or 200, then you're actually measuring some methane. So doing it over grills and propane tanks and that sort of thing. So that's actually what we're measuring. But as you can imagine, that's one narrow beam that we have to, scan all over. We're gonna do some things to make that a little bit better over time. We may also develop our own laser system to do that with, so that we're not confined to how this is actually functioning.
And that only measures in the air once it touches ground?
Yeah, so we're actually thinking about doing it possibly, and we're not sure if we're going to do this yet or not. We may employ the use of some, and this is some things that we're toying with, some other, like basically doing it on a horizontal scale rather than so sort of like a radar system rather than a up and down system. The tricky part about that is that you have to have enough of the gas in a given column of air, which means that going down is much easier.
Don't you need something?
Yeah, we would put a reflector, a retroreflector, or something like that in the way. But we're not sure that that's really going to work how we want it to work. So so we may just get better at being sophisticated at flight path as well as what we put onto this laser. We're also going to combine that with these multiple wavelength spectral cameras and leverage that kind of data. You can also, there are cameras that look at methane as well, but they're very confined spatially. They're also very heavy typically and uber expensive. But, you know, not that this was cheap. This is not a cheap sensor. This is like a, I don't know, this is like a, what was it, 15,000?
Yeah,
18,000? Yeah, so, and methane cameras are way more expensive than that and don't give the concentration values. So it's like, well, why? Yeah, and you have to back out the thermals because it's at the same wavelength as the thermals are. So you have to do a lot of owl. Yeah.
Yeah, once they overlap, it becomes a little difficult to sort of, you know, unmerge the data.
Yeah.
Thermals is
So what I was just actually showing you with the little FLIR camera, because if you're looking at something that's hot, say it's hot ground and hot cows and things, it's hard to distinguish between what is methane in the air versus what is just a hot cow. You know, hot cows. So, but I mean, you know, because it washes it out. It's like if you looked up at the bright sun and you had something else bright flashing at you, you couldn't tell the difference between the two. So there's a lot of, you'd have to have two different cameras to put on there.
Maybe you can filter them. I don't know. We definitely have to investigate it.
Yeah.
you'd have to have both of them on the drone.
Yep. So you need a bigger drone. So this drone's, we love him, but he's done.
I saw like an airplane. You're not no drones like airplanes you're gonna use.
I don't think we're gonna need. So the drone that Census makes, I'll show you their drone has a wings, and it's actually like a plane, but but it's not huge. It has a wingspan of about 5 to 6 feet, and it's a little bit smaller than me.
Going over cows and stuff, this is probably better.
For now, I think, yeah. And actually, I like the idea of, especially for cows. Now, for the oil and gas companies, probably what they're doing is going to be a little bit better because we're going over really long and pipeline. You know, where is the problem going to be? It's probably going to be somewhere over that pipe. You know, and that pipe goes for a mile, right? And so we want to be able to go. But in this particular case, you want to be able to stop and hover. And you want to be able to really investigate certain areas, and it's a little bit of a smaller range. So I really think the next step up, the Matrice, will be better.
And when you're over cows, the methane is just if you happen to catch.
If we happen to catch it. Yeah. And also just in general, what is it like? I mean, I think over a longer period of time, what we'd like to do is we'd like to do it on a when they're used to it. And also when we have a little bit more time too. So say, you know, and where I'm not like freaking out because this UAV is overweighted, right? And wants to go up when I tell it to go down.
I mean, that literally means they have to fart for you to catch.
Belch. That's what 90% of it is from belching. It's from when they eat. Right. And there are other things that we can do that may not necessarily be on a drone. You know, it may be instead what we would want to do for cows is we would want to come out and maybe John is tall enough to, but maybe we would have something that would just, okay, they're out here for a few hours and we want to just take a measurement. And it isn't a drone, it's maybe something that's sitting in a given area, maybe by the watering hole.
And you'd only have to do one or a couple, but it sounds like you need something that catches and measures both ends. that would be real data.
being able to observe it for a long period of time, you'll be able to get some good data. We did get data actually from today, which is kind of interesting.
You happen to catch a bird?
A little bit, yeah. We caught some burps. We caught some belches.
That data, isn't it out there? They can tell you, oh, this one cow puts out this much.
They tell you that. You know what the range is? It's 200 to 500 liters per day. Well, what were they eating?
Right.
Were they in a feedlot? Were they in a feedlot? What's the difference between a Mashona on grass versus whatever cow they just did? Right? Exactly.
That would be amazing.
That's what I was telling them, like mapping all those differences and comparing.
But how did they get? Is it
They
real?
have a little. Yeah, what they do, I don't actually know if it's. I mean, I don't know if I trust it. Frankly, I would prefer to get long-term or longer term. So we did this for a few minutes, like 10 minutes.
Yeah, but it's random because you're over 300, 500, 600 head, and it's
Right.
But-
It's all together.
and what they 200 to 500. How did they have a cow in a chamber?
They have it in a chamber. So they have it come up to a chamber and they have it with some sweet, and who knows what it is. It's something that makes them want to go and eat, right?
But they stay in there for a day to measure.
Nah, they just come up and they measure on a given.
And then they measure what they're eating.
There's no real data.
That's why it's a business, right? Because there's nobody really doing it right. It's not really.
We need one cow that has a movable dome, and it's with the herd, and for the whole day and the night, and then you're gonna have real data.
We could do that with a drone. We really could.
Oh, the drone, you just follow it around.
We could do
Track
that with a
one
drone.
cow.
We could.
But if the wind's blowing this way in the drone, and
No, you can see. It's okay. You'd be able to see it. You'd be able to see it. We were out in a pretty high wind day over the landfill, and we were able to see the plume of methane. You're able to map it because this thing's mapping. Like as soon as that burp comes out of that.
It's not that little beam of light that it's mapping.
Well, it can't. What's
It's mapping the column.
Yes. Well, no, I see. I hear where you're going. Here's what we can do. Okay. Oh,
It's not like your infrared camera where you see a cloud
We're
over
gonna combine-
5 cows.
we're going to combine both of those. That's what we're going to do. So imagine you have poof. All right, you have a camera that's able to see this cow belches, and then laser guy goes, how much was it?
That's how much it was.
Right. That's what we want to be able to do.
But how-
I'm not able to do that today. Right now I have
You're only
duct
getting-
tape.
So the picture is telling you the volume, and the thing is telling you the density.
Now, there's other things that we could potentially do that I'm really interested in doing, and we're going to probably get another laser in here to work on. And this is, my background's in optoelectronics. I love lasers. And so what we can likely do is take that. You've seen a laser light show, I'm sure. So imagine now you have that ability to create you've got a plume of methane, and you want to be able to understand the concentration of that pretty accurately, very fast. Do a laser light show just in that general area. So you're scanning with a laser. That's what we'd like to do. Mm-hmm. So there's some really cool things that I think we can do, which would be really exciting out in the field. Now that's for methane mapping of cows. Now for carbon dioxide mapping of entire fields, that's going to be a totally different thing. Going to be a very different technology. I haven't quite worked everything out yet. Yes. So you want to know so if you look out right here over this yard, how much of that carbon dioxide that is in the air that we're all breathing out, how much is being sunk into the grass and into the soil? How much?
Is it trees or some trees at night they give off carbon dioxide and the day they give off oxygen?
They actually, which something I just learned, through their trunks, they give off methane, which is really interesting. So
Kill all the trees.
I know. But wetlands give off tons of methane. So that's interesting to map. But that aside. But yes, there are some trees that
And grass?
grass basically goes to neutral, goes to nothing during the evening. When you shut off the lights, it basically goes to sleep. So you basically just get nothing. You don't have any carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere. There may be some plants that actually keep taking up a little bit of carbon dioxide, because there are some plants that give off oxygen during, so it's basically respiration, right? So they take in carbon dioxide and they give off oxygen. There are some plants that give off a lot of oxygen during the evening, but not grasses. I think grasses just basically go dormant. And also during the winter seasons, they're very, so, and a lot of this data is actually available from, remember I showed those eddy covariance towers? They're very fascinating because they have these in sporadic areas where they just stick them up on a mast and go, here's data. And it's usually universities or those kinds of folks. And they basically give you the data, a lot like the satellite data too. There's so much satellite data and climate data available to us. But you have to synthesize that data. And what would be really cool is to have eddy covariance tower measurements. I mean, we could, see if there's one close by, or just have eddy covariance. Basically, it's like a weather station, So it takes data, and what it does is it looks at what is the turnover of gases and all gases and air, and then goes, okay, specifically, what was carbon dioxide doing? And then it looks at that. And it also can do water vapor as well, John. So anyhow, that's one thing that we would like to do, but I recognize that point data is not going to be sufficient. And you can't easily take, I don't think this will work. You can't really take eddy covariance measurements around and fly around, because you're going to get all kinds of weird eddies from a UAV. Somebody's tried to do it, but they didn't actually give data. Remember that paper, Al? Yeah. It was so silly.
You just need a tower on a mobile tower.
They do that, but again, it doesn't give you. You have to take data for a long period of time, and it isn't really what is really meaningful is actually what I was talking about. You can, especially with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and knowing what what species you have, especially if they're pretty consistent. Like I've got 3 species where 95% of this land is these species, and then we just fly over that area of land where we know let's say we have 3 different or 2 different grasses, and that's pretty much it. And then what we know is how that we have a model, a prescribed model, and we're able to, from the pattern that we've figured out from closed chamber association with, all right, this particular grass, the Bahia grass, I probably Bahia grass is uptaking this amount of carbon dioxide when it has this kind of absorption or emission in these particular wavelengths. And usually it's a balance of 1 or 2 or 3 wavelengths that you look at all 3 of them and you say, okay, when we have this kind of profile, then this is what the plant is doing. When we have this kind of profile, it's asleep. It's not doing anything. So, and there are pretty good correlations that they've created for photosynthesis of various plants. We could just do it for these particular grasses and then fly over in various seasons.
You probably have it already for Bahia.
Yes, probably.
Bermuda and Bahia.
Great to get, as Jim was saying the other day, once the stockpile grass roots get really deeper and they double in their depth down in there, they really increase their carbon sequestration. So that'd be an interesting comparison, right? To get a stockpiled field compared to a regular field, and then you can really show the total ranching method.
I mean, I was so excited when I contacted you. I was almost like what you're. I would just, come on, we got to do something about it.
I felt that when I saw the prize. I'm like, God, we can win that. Dang, we can win that. I wish I had a team. Oh,
So that's exactly.
I was like, yes.
We build life, man. Right here. We build life, man.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. That's all my show and tell.
Great job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.